Good morning.
Good morning.
Delighted to be here. With Steph and Catherine, it kind of feels like I'm home. It's the first time here, but it kind of feels like I'm home.
Yeah.
That's nice.
I know.
Really sweet. Does anyone know how many of the world's great religions came out of the English language? 0. French. Italian. Greek. Spanish?
No.
I don't know. Interesting. At least 5 of the world's major religions, and we think perhaps 6, though we can't verify the 6th one, came out of one language. Anybody know what that language is? Aramaic. The language of the man named Yeshua. It was the language of a man named Baha'u'llah. It was the language of a man named Muhammad. It was the language of a man named Zoroaster. It was the language of the Old Testament Jews, Abraham. And all of the Jewish wisdom keepers spoke one language. There's a reason why that language sourced so many religions. And sadly, in the Western world, most of us have been told that it came out of the Greeks, that the Greeks wrote it down. Now, does anybody here know any Semitic peoples? Arabs, Jews?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you imagine these Semitic peoples saying, we have developed this flower of understanding. Greeks, we'd like you to write it down for us. Now, don't expect Greek scholars to jump up anytime soon and tell you it was all Aramaic. But if Yeshua sat in most of what are called Christian churches today, and you'll notice there are some 32,000 sects, he would say that's all Greek to me. The meanings of his key concepts and his key words have been lost. And imagine that you're the best translator of Greek or Russian into English and English into Russian in the world, and Catherine got an email about our week of workshops this week, and a gentleman from Russia wanted to come and be part of the week. And knowing that you spoke Russian and had an extra room in your house, she asked you if you'd house this person and translate for him, and you were delighted to. The fellow comes, we spend the week, we go out for lunch and dinner once or twice, and we just have a great time. And at the end of the week, I want this man to know what I think of him. I don't speak any Russian, so I ask you if you will tell him that I think he's really cool. And you turn to him in your best Russian and you say, Michael thinks you've got a low body temperature. You translated my words perfectly, but you didn't say a word about what I meant. Sadly, most of the Aramaic language, I shouldn't say it sadly, the Aramaic is idiomatic. You know, that's an idiom when I say cool. And I mean, you're really great. Most of the Aramaic key thoughts are idiomatic. And if you don't know the meaning of an idiom, you can be the best translator in the world, and you can't translate the word. It can't be done. Vladimir Lenin, a man who was responsible probably for more deaths on planet Earth than any other human being in history, said, if you want to destroy a culture, change the meaning of its words. Most of the key words in Aramaic that Yeshua thought, spoke, and taught have had their meanings changed. And in many cases become the very reverse of what the words meant. There are 5 major keys that Yeshua gave to living as a human being. And in fact, that's one of the words that's been changed. We're told if you have a body, then you must be human. My offering is that having a body does not qualify you for human life. Anybody here ever held a newborn child?
Yes.
If you would, go back to the moment where you held that newborn and share with me your word that describes the essence of the newborn. What word would that be?
Amazing.
Amazing.
Innocent.
Innocence.
Awesome.
Awesome. Now, this is a question that Jeannie and I have asked of tens of thousands of people all over the globe, and 100% of the time the answer is some variation on the theme of love. Why? Because everybody knows what human life is. It is the active presence of love. And if you do not have that, you do not have a human life. At any moment in your life, when you are not functioning as the conscious active presence of love, human life has been blotted out in you. Now, there's an interesting passage in Luke where the man named Yeshua, his name, by the way, was not Jesus, which comes from Jesus, hail Zeus, wasn't his name. You know, they were bringing a rabbi to the Greco-Roman world. Jews were not very popular in the Greco-Roman world. So what are we going to call this guy? We're going to call him Yeshua? Well, that's not going to be accepted. But everybody knows Zeus.
Right.
Hey, Zeus. Hail Zeus. That'll make him acceptable. Only it didn't make him acceptable. It made the Greek ideas that were put in his mouth acceptable. In this particular passage, Yeshua addresses the idea of human life. And it's kind of an interesting passage. You have to look at it carefully to really see the nuances in it. It's Luke 10:25, and what it says is this. And a scribe stood up to test him, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? Now, Yeshua knows this man is a scribe, and that this is a trap. And he knows that the man can parrot the words out of his brain that are in the scriptures about, or at least close to, his question. And so instead of answering the question, Yeshua turns the question back to this man, who he knows will parrot words, and will give you the Greek translation, the popular Greek, and then we'll look at what the Aramaic really said. And then you'll notice, after the man parrots his answer, Yeshua doesn't say, that's the right answer. What he says to the man is, you spoke the truth. And then he tells the man the question that his answer answers. And it's not the question that was asked. So remember, the question is, how do I inherit eternal life? And so Yeshua turns it back to him and says, what is written in the law? How do you read it? The man answered him saying, this is Greek, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, and all your strength, and your neighbor as yourself. Now to that answer, Yeshua replies, you spoke the truth. He doesn't say that's the right answer. He says you spoke the truth. And then the question that answer answers, he gives to the man. And he says, do this, and you shall live. Now, is he saying to the man, excuse me, sir, you have no business asking about eternal life? You are already dead. There's no sense in you asking that question. You do not have a human life. There is not love active in you. And you just gave me the words that speak the truth about how to be human. The active presence of love must be in your mind. Your human beingness must be there when you think of the Creator, when you think of neighbor. And when that's true, you have the first key. Because you take that the next step, and they ask him, what's the first law? And this is the first key of the Aramaic Yeshua. In Aramaic, that answer isn't, you must love the Lord your God and your neighbor as yourself. Yeshua never told anybody to love their neighbor. That would be an atrocity to do to a human being. Why? Because if one has hostility and fear in them, they will bring neighbors forward who will bring up their hostility and fear. They will effort trying to love their neighbor as a verb, something they can do to their neighbor, and they will fail. It is a setup for failure to say, love your neighbor. It's an impossibility. Change the meaning of the word. What is love? Anybody ever held a newborn? That is love. Now think about, once again, imagine holding the newborn. Is the newborn loving you, or is the newborn love?
Newborn's love.
Clearly, the newborn is love. It's a noun, it's not a verb. It's not something we can do to each other. And you'll notice most people come into the world, they have the love knocked out of them, and then they're sent out to find somebody to love them. Remember the kids had that song a few years ago? Looking for love in all the wrong places, looking for love in too many faces. You can't get it from anybody. You can't give it to anybody. But you can sure confuse a culture if you change the meaning of their words. Effort being the space of love in the presence of your neighbor, especially if that neighbor brings up hostility and fear in you, and now you have something you can accomplish. The first law, when the Greeks translated you must love God, the word there is not love. The word in Aramaic is rachma. Now, rachma is a word. There's a community of Aramaic-speaking peoples out in California, several thousand people, and we visited with them a few years ago with our manuscript. And we asked them, because we had been searching diligently and come up with a definition for the word. We had 25 Aramaic scholars working diligently to get to the key words. And this community said, we don't know what the word means. Its meaning has been lost. But our tradition says that it is the most precious jewel that you could have. What would be the most precious jewel that a human body could have? Would it not be a human life? Would it not be the presence of the created essence of love that we are? So when they ask Yeshua, what's the first law? And this is the first key. He says you must have rachma when you think of the Creator, when you think of neighbor, in order to maintain self. Rachma is a filter in the frontal lobes of the brain that is a gateway for human life to enter the human form. Hostility and fear are the other two filters there that block that gateway. Hostility, fear, and love are mutually exclusive energies in this form. The first key to understand is, and you're the only person that can be responsible for this, is maintaining this condition called rachma that is the gateway for your human life to enter your human form. And you'll notice how quickly hostility or fear, when resonated in us, can eliminate that. First key, maintain rachma. Keep that gateway open. The best way I know to open that gateway is to be in a quiet space. Imagine holding the newborn and bring that presence to your physiology. Make that a daily practice. And you will grow in your divinity, which is love. When you confront your ideas of the Creator, and it's amazing how many people, oftentimes in churches, hate God. I remember working with a young man who was in his 40s when he came to one of our intensives. And when he was 3 years of age, his mother had cancer. He was a devout church-going boy with his family, a devout family. And his preacher told him that if he prayed hard enough, his mother would be healed. God would heal his mother. And his mother died. And he carried from the age of 3 until the moment where he touched into that hatred for God. First law. It's not a rule to follow. It's how the energy system works. Is keep that gateway when you think of the Creator. And then neighbor. And interestingly enough, in Aramaic, neighbor means anybody that you think about. If you think about someone, let's say the person who everybody would vote as the worst person that has ever lived on planet Earth. Your responsibility is to maintain your human life in your mind, the presence of love. whatever they're doing. Maintain Rahman, maintain that gateway, and you will have a human life. Now, if a neighbor shows up that brings up your rage, your fear, your sadness, your guilt, your grief, your terror, your trauma, you have something you can actually effort and produce a result of maintaining the presence of love, whatever they're doing. First key, maintain Rahman in your mind. The second key, the most important thing to know out of the teachings of Yeshua. There's a passage that the Greeks translate for us that goes like this. The eye is the lamp of the soul. If the light for you is darkness, how deep will your darkness become? Has somebody ever thought about that passage? Let's see, the eye is the lamp. And if the light is dark, how can light be darkness? That's silly. That's a silly Greek translation. In Aramaic, here's what Yeshua said. The perceptual output of your mind, the world that your mind generates, is meant to be a guide for your journey through life. If the light, the guide you follow, is darkness, and in Aramaic, darkness is hostility or fear, how deep will your darkness become? What crazy things will you do to destroy yourself? Anybody here ever done something you regret? Go back to one time when you did something that you regret. If you would, for a moment, go back to one event where you did something you regret. And then if you would, please, shout out your answer to my question loud enough so we can hear you. What were you feeling that motivated you to do what you now regret having done?
Fear.
Fear. Anger. Now, this is another question, Jeannie, I have asked of tens of thousands of people, and we've never had anybody who said I was in this wonderful, loving, connected, sweet, newborn state. Everybody's answer is always some variation on the theme of hostility or fear. Why? Because hostility or fear is darkness, and it makes us do what we will regret. If hostility or fear is active in you, zip your lips, stop your behavior until you get restored to your human life. Anybody here ever been to Mammoth Cave? Pretty mammoth, isn't it? Imagine, now here's an analogy for what Yeshua was saying with this particular principle, the second principle. Imagine that you go to Mammoth Cave and you are told there's a bag, a clear plastic bag with $1 million worth of diamonds in it, and all you have to do is find the diamonds and get out of the cave and they're yours. And you go into the cave and are handed a pen light. So here I am in Mammoth Cave with a pen light. And I can see one tiny part of the cave at a time. I stand for hours and hours and hours, and I finally see the sparkle of the diamonds. Of course, I'm going to keep the light on the diamonds because I may never find them again. And I go charging off for the diamonds and don't use the light to show me the 30-foot pit that's in front of me. I don't get out of Mammoth Cave alive. If you allow darkness to guide your behavior, if you allow darkness to become the light for your earthly life. You know, there's some interesting Harvard research that says that in a time frame where 10,000 brain cells are firing, there are 10,000 measurable units of electrical activity going on in the brain. The max amount of data that goes into conscious awareness is 9 bits. And it's been estimated that we live in a 20 trillion bit world in that time frame, which is about a 25th of a second. So think about it. 9 bits, 10,000 brain cells firing, 20 trillion bits potentially available. That's a pen light in Mammoth Cave if I've ever seen one. Make sure your lights are on, Yeshua is saying. Your mind is a device to be connected to love in order to function properly. Anybody got a device in your home, your car, your office, your shop, your kitchen, that if you unplug it works really well? There is no such device. The human mind is no different. Yeshua in this key is telling us what powers human perception and human life, and it is the active presence of love. And if we disconnect from that, how deep will our darkness become? What kind of things will we do to destroy ourselves? Second key, keep your lights on. Make sure that the perceptual output of your mind is connected to the active presence of love. Third key, the most important thing to do. Now, I know there's a very strong component in our culture that says there's nothing you can do. That's a lie. The man Yeshua says very clearly to people, why do you come to me calling my name and you do not do what I tell you to do? And yet there are millions of people who are believing there's nothing they can do. They're certainly not following the man named Yeshua. The most important thing you can do is to understand the tool of forgiveness. Forgiveness has nothing to do, as the Greeks have taught us, with letting somebody else off the hook. You notice we live in a culture where we've been taught, you did something really terrible that caused all this pain inside of me, but it's okay, I'll forgive you. I will let you off the hook for what's happening inside of me. If I let you off the hook for what's happening inside of me, have I done anything to change what's happening inside of me? If you never learn to change what's happening inside of you, you get to live the title of our workshop this afternoon. Why is this happening to me again? Because your perceptual experiences come from inside of you. They are not imposed on you from without. The things that tarnish and defile your perception are internal dynamics that have never been caused by anyone else. And so forgiveness is the tool with which you go inside yourself and literally delete or remove hostility or fear. It is an internal process of collapsing perceptions based in hostility or fear that take over. And when these perceptions collapse, they collapse in on themselves. You might remember the visual at 9/11. The towers collapsed on their own footprint. Free fall speed. That's another conversation. When you know how to forgive a la Yeshua in the Aramaic, you know how to collapse perception based in hostility or fear. And when you collapse perceptions based in hostility or fear, you drop into the part of your mind that you've been hiding from yourself, the part that holds your pain. And when you drop into the part that holds your pain and you bring active love with you, your human life with you, then your pain begins to dissolve. And it is the dissolution of pain that is forgiveness. It has nothing to do with the Greek act of pardoning, of letting somebody else off the hook because of what's going on inside of you. The fourth key of Yeshua is the most important block. You've got to understand Satan, because Satan is the problem. Now, there's a Greek idea of Satan, this dude with the red suit, the tail, and the pitchfork. Nothing to do with Aramaic words of Yeshua about Satan. In Aramaic, Satan means the resistor. Here's what the man Yeshua thought when he was telling people about Satan. The resistor, one who misleads. That's Satan. And most people live their lives trapped in Satan. You notice the average person, I'm interacting with someone, I've been with them, they've been through this issue 87 different times with 42 different people. I've watched them over and over and over again, and I say, you're telling me your story about what happened again. I've heard that story from you before. Have you noticed that? Would you be interested in entertaining the fact that, having been through that pain 87 different times with 42 different people, that maybe the pain is about you and it's yours? What does the average person do? No, Michael, that's not true. Let me tell you the real problem. By the way, has anybody got somebody in your life, if they just changed your life, you'd be doing okay? That's called trapped in Satan. The resistor, one who misleads. You'll notice if you've been through a particular painful reality 87 different times with 42 different people, you're the only one that was there every time. It's about you, it's not about them. But the average person resists that and tells a story about how somebody else is the problem. There's only one problem in your life. There's some good news about that and some bad news. The bad news is you're it. The good news is the solution lies within you as well, if you hear the Aramaic Yeshua in his instructions. To free yourself from Satan, you must know how to forgive. To free yourself from the resistance and the story that's been going on in your bloodline probably for generations is accomplished through forgiveness, by removal of that story and that resistance. The fifth key is the most important request to make. You know, when you look at these issues that are often generational, you just look, you know, they talked in the scriptures, the sins of the fathers will be passed into 3 and 4 generations. By the way, the word sin, when Yeshua thought about sin, he was talking about archery. Sin is an archery term in Aramaic. When you fire at the bullseye and you miss the bullseye, the scorekeeper yells sin. You're off the mark. Like as in take another shot. Not you're a sinner and you should buy that as an identity. But rather it simply means an energy that's off the mark. When you take a device, this human form that is designed to incarnate active present love, and you put rage and guilt and grief and fear and hatred and vengeance in it, you sin. And those sins are passed on generation to generation to generation. Yeshua's invitation, this guy is no wimp to follow. Yeshua's invitation is for you to develop the capacity to go into every nook and cranny of your mind, your emotions, and yes, your genes, and forgive. Remove the very capacity for any form of hostility or fear. Now, when you look back, if you do the numbers, 30 generations, there are over 1.7 billion people in your bloodline and mine. Are you prepared to face that and work through it? That's Yeshua's invitation. And you don't have to do it on your own. To do it is beyond your understanding. You can't figure it out. You know, one of the number we'll talk on, I think it's Friday night, we're doing Thursday night, we're doing codependence. We'll talk about what I call the pseudo-solutions of the non-being mind. The number one pseudo-solution is if I could just figure this out. You can't figure it out. But you can forgive it. You can consistently, persistently apply forgiveness until you have deleted everything based in hostility or fear that comes from the generations. Otherwise, you will suffer from the only mental disorder on the planet, and the only mental disorder is thought disorder. Thought disorder. Thoughts based in hate, fear, rage, guilt, grief, trauma, blame. Are addictive thoughts that disorder the human system. They are sin. How do I clean up 30 generations of that? Yeshua spoke, fifth key, of a power in us that in Aramaic was called Ruka Dekudsha. Ruka Dekudsha translates, and the Greeks translate as the Holy Spirit. There's nothing there about a disembodied spirit being. Ruka Dekudsha translates as a literal feminine elemental force in us that when invited into activity undoes the effects of our errors and teaches us the truth. Literally, when invited into activity, she can process you right down to your genetic toes and remove everything that never belonged and leave you with a physiological device that is virgin in nature. In that virgin state, you can have the immaculate conception. You can go directly to the mind of God and incarnate in your form God's thoughts. And there's nothing left in you to go against it. And you live as the divine being that you were designed to be. That is the work of Yeshua. And I offer there the 5 keys to that. And what I'd like to do is step in very briefly to a forgiveness process. I'm going to invite you to close your eyes and go inside and just take a couple of deep breaths. Now, in a world where you believe somebody else is the problem in your life, first century Aramaic forgiveness is ridiculous to do. It is silly. It is backward. It is inside out. It is upside down. Or so we think. The truth is, it is our perceptual minds that have it inside out, upside down, and backward. And silliness that someone else could possibly reach inside of you and cause something to happen. That is less than love. So, without going into an explanation of the why and how of it, we'll do that in the workshop this afternoon. I'm just going to invite you to try it and see what happens. So allow yourself to just take a couple of deep breaths and let everything in you soften. If there's any tension anywhere in your form, just let it soften and let it go. Remember the truth of you. In creation, you were made of this stuff called love. That is the only thing true about you. And you will notice that it's fairly easy for that love to express unless someone is doing something different than what you want them to do. Notice that unless you're just a generally miserable person, when everybody's doing what you want them to do, you're in a pretty cool place. But notice that when you want someone to do something different, you hold a goal for them or for yourself, that's when hostility or fear come in. Breathe deeply. In the Aramaic language, the word forgive is shabag, and it means to cancel. Now, if I applied canceling to them, that would be murder. Probably not a good idea. If I applied canceling to myself, that would be suicide. Probably not a good idea. But in any circumstance where I have upset, I can always cancel my goal the way I want it to be. So think about that situation where you have upset and there's something you want from the object of attention of that upset. And you want to look at what it is you want as opposed to what you don't want. If you have a child, let's say, that's being verbally abusive, the average person would say, I want my child to stop being verbally abusive. But that's not what they want. That's what they don't want. What they want is for their child to speak to them lovingly, gently, respectfully. That would be the goal involved. I have an employer that won't give me my raise. My goal would be for my employer to give me the raise I deserve. I have a spouse that isn't fulfilling all of my whims. My goal would be for my spouse to be obedient. Identify the goal you hold for the particular circumstance that you're going to do this forgiveness process on. And breathe. What is it you want from the object of attention that you say causes your irritation or upset? What is it you want from them? And maybe it's the person in the mirror. Now, as I said, the word forgive is shebag. It means to cancel. Now, this sounds silly until you understand how the human mind works, but I'll just ask you to try it and see what happens. Cancel your goal for that person to do whatever it is you want them to do. Notice the breath that comes. Breathe deeply as you just totally and completely shed that goal. And then notice there is a power in you, Rukadakucha. Invite that power to clean you of whatever the hostility or fear is in that circumstance. Invite that power to remove that energy from you. And breathe. Bring in fully that conscious, active presence of love that you are. Breathe it in totally, completely into every cell of your structure and allow that presence of love to dissolve the hostility or fear brought up in that circumstance. And breathe. The truth is, you are the light of the world. Hostility and fear are the bushel baskets that Yeshua talked about that hide that light. As you forgive and remove every bushel basket from your mind, from your emotions, from your genes, your light gets brighter. When you stand as the pure, active presence of love, you will transform the world. Do this, and you shall live.